Nandan, before we dive into AI and all the exciting things happening on that front in India, I just wanted to get your pulse check of everything going on in the world in these uncertain times, which just seems to be the buzzword lately. Is that having any sort of effect in terms of AI deployment on the infrastructure build out, where people, data centers still need various components and parts that are getting caught up in some of these trade tensions? How are you seeing the landscape?
No, I think more than the macro issues, I think the real question is how do enterprises deploy AI? Because AI, there's a general principle in enterprises that the more complicated or the more intrusive a technology is, the more difficult to implement inside a company. Because companies have lots of complexity, they have systems built over the years, they have data in silos, a lot of issues there. And we saw that with the cloud, because the cloud actually, the first time you actually put in a technology where you have to replace something, and now 17, 18 years after the cloud was introduced, we're still at about 25-30% penetration. So I think AI is even more complex because of data. AI is only useful if it works on the data of an enterprise. And that is very hard to organize for AI. So I think that's going to be your gating factor rather than macroeconomic issues.
So for companies that are trying to deploy it at scale, because they seem to have moved past sort of the experimentation phase, they're kind of gotten over the hype phase, but as you say, deploying it at scale company-wide and getting employee buy-in and organizing their data and figuring out even what data they have. A lot of companies are finding like it's so siloed, they actually don't know all the useful information they carry. What are the biggest challenges and what are the biggest sort of unblockers of getting over those?
Well, I think as you rightly said, I think the last year a lot of it was people doing pilots, experimentation. At Infosys, probably 400 customers are doing some AI work or the other. But a couple of things. One is after the experimentation, people are realizing that they need to have an architecture, a strategy, how to organize all this at scale, how to organize the data at scale, how to create multiple models, how to there's a people issue, and then there's a business workflow issue, because how do you bring this into the workflow of the business is the hard part. But I think the big thing which is happening now is applying agents, which are genuinely useful to businesses, because if you can have an agent in your business process, order to cash or procure to pay or whichever are the business process, and you bring in agents, there's a significant productivity benefit. So I think enterprise will be driven by agentic capabilities.
So we just heard the PayPal CEO talk about the costs of taking on this technology and people needing data scientists and other kinds of experts. What are you finding in terms of businesses realizing or not realizing whether this technology is worth the premium that's put on it?
No, I think that's why I think the agentic thing, more than just the chatbots, the agentic stuff is showing companies real value. They're able to implement it, they're able to reduce costs, improve customer satisfaction, reduce time to market, reduce time to collect money, real hard business issues. So we're seeing that. I think that will be the tipping point on usage. That's why I think the takeoff will happen. But you can't again implement it in silos because over time you'll create a new set of legacy applications. You have to think through how do you put all of it together on an enterprise-wide architecture, and that's where the best companies are trying to figure that out.
Yeah, and what about deploying the technology for societal effects? Because there's kind of a sense of like this is going to become like a have and have-nots of companies that can afford it, consumers that can afford it are the ones that will benefit, and the society writ large is sort of not taking part. But you've talked, and when we were here last year, talking about how AI can help India address the teacher shortage.
Yes.
by having AI be the tutors and
Sure.
the educators. Where are you seeing the places where it can have the most benefit for society?
No, that's a great question. And on my other hat, I am involved in India's national digital infrastructure. So obviously, AI is a big part of that. So 3 cases. One is using AI for language. India is a country with hundreds of languages and dialects and 22 official languages. And now using AI, there's automatic voice translation of these languages being rolled out with Indian data. You can't just train this on the web. You have to go and get samples of people talking in a village or something. So that's language is a big use case that's being rolled out, and the government has a program called Bhashini, which does something like 300 million inferences a month. It's already at scale applying AI to a social issue. The second example is education, and now many schools and states are now rolling out using AI-based capabilities in a safe environment for children to improve their because many kids don't even know how to read well or write well or to compute well. So it's not about having a smartphone app. It's about getting children to learn
Just
to.
the basics.
Yeah, it's very basic. And these are the children who are struggling around the world. So there's stuff happening now on that. And the third big one is on agriculture, because again, India has a large number of farmers. You have to improve their productivity and so on. So a lot of work on applying. So I think people are taking these very strong social issues and building AI at scale to make it work.
Yeah, and what are people finding in terms of their experiences with that? Like you were saying, for education, for kids, for basics, if they're already disadvantaged where they're not getting the education they need, then what kind of technology do they need to even access?
Yeah.
These
So
platforms?
think of them as practice AI. In the sense, what happens to a child if he or she is in a class where she's significantly behind the other kids? He or she is too embarrassed to even speak up, and ultimately they drop out. But if you can create in the safety of some kind of a lab where they have their own speakers and they are talking to this AI, and the AI is very gently correcting them, and the AI figures out that they don't know this syllable or they don't know this vowel or whatever, then by practice, the AI helps them get better. So this is a safe space. The teachers like it because they don't, that gets happened and then the kids can come back. So you have to think through all this. How do you make a safe space? How do you make it non-embarrassing for the kids? How do you create a model where if the child is willing to invest time, they can get better? And we are seeing some good results now. We're going to get researchers and impact and analysts to actually see the benefits. But I think the first indications are positive.
Yeah. And what about the safeguards and AI safety? The Alex from PayPal was talking about with AI, bad actors can take advantage of the technology too. What are you seeing from a regulatory framework perspective?
Well, I think the regulation AI is quite diverse. Some countries don't have any regulation at all. Some regions have very restrictive regulations. So it's not a uniform thing. And that's one is, of course, to prevent those things happening. But if you're a company developing, which is a global multinational, when you build an AI and roll it out, you have to make it conform to different regulations. And you have to do it a priori. You can't build it and then say, oh, let me make it work here, make it work there. So I think building for the world requires you to be very cognizant of the variations in regulations. In fact, at Infosys, we have put out something called the Responsible AI Toolkit. It's a completely open source learnings of how to build AI responsibly, because we think that should be a public good.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you about India's place in the AI race. Like a lot of the conversation usually revolves around the US and China, and we've seen the reaction around the DeepSeek model that China had deployed and how much that hit NVIDIA's stock and various others. But India is a player too, and including in sort of the war for talent.
Yeah.
Where do you see the country's place, and what more does it need to do to keep up? Because we were just hearing from some other tech leaders that the U.S. is ahead right now, but actually not by as much as maybe many people think.
Well, I think, first of all, India will definitely be a huge talent pool for AI. Already, if you look at platforms like GitHub, India has the second largest set of developers on the platform globally after the US.
Yeah, I remember last year you were like, there's no more Chinese on GitHub, there's only Indians.
Same thing with students, but I don't know what will happen there. But so that's on the AI talent. But the other area where I think India will lead is actually deploying applications that make sense for people. We talked about that. Because the way it works is, it's not about AI replacing jobs, it's about AI amplifying human potential. And in a society where there are not enough doctors, not enough teachers, can you actually use the AIs to improve the productivity substantially of teachers or doctors so that more people are reached with services? So you're going to see that kind of a trend. So I think India will be the use case capital of AI. And there will, of course, be, people will build their models and all that. But increasingly, the competitive thing is going to go into applications. How to use all this stuff. It's nice to build more models, but you have to make it work for some useful purpose. In that area, India will lead.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you bring that up because, what we now know as ChatGPT, the experiments of, working out some of the kinks, the, quote, hallucinations was done in India first.
Yeah, sure. So I think that's the other point, that if you're going to build for businesses and governments, you're putting a brand at risk, right? I mean, if you're using some consumer chatbot and it gives the wrong answer, it's not a big deal. But if a company's products give wrong answers, then it's a blowback on the brand. So I think, therefore, that deployment will be much more measured and careful. And that's what we're seeing around the world, that people want to absolutely make sure that they're trained well, the data is curated, doesn't hallucinate, there's no bias, there's no embarrassment. Only then they want to roll it out.
Yeah. And you talked about energy being the next UPI revolution, and UPI is famously the digital payments system that really unlocked a lot of growth in India. How do you see that in the context of AI, given the energy demands of the technology and the infrastructure needed to really deploy it? I mean, already, there's various limitations on build-outs, even here in the US, because our energy infrastructure isn't as robust and sort of vast as we want it to be.
Sure. Well, there are multiple facets to this. One is AI as a consumer of energy will be a big consumer because of the AI data centers, and we have to plan for that, which is why many of the companies are looking at nuclear and so on. So that's one part of it. The other is using AI to make the grid more efficient, using the AI to do demand supply forecasting of energy, fault detection, consumer experience, and so on. But the larger issue is that the electricity grid, the grid part of it has been pretty much static for 140 years, since Edison and Tesla. Remember, they had a thing called the current wars, where Edison was proposing DC current and Tesla and Westinghouse were proposing AC. And that got settled in 1890. After that, the thing hasn't changed. Suddenly, the grid is facing all these challenges. One is, on one side, the renewables coming with intermittent power and using batteries or pumped hydro. But more importantly, every home will have energy production with the solar unit. It will have a battery from its EV car. So when millions of people are producers, consumers, buyers, sellers, and storers of energy, the grid has to completely be transformed. So that is the real challenge that's there. And if you transform that and then build on top of that AI with all the data flows, then it will be pretty awesome. But this is a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar journey.
Yeah. Well, hopefully next year we'll see
Sure.
where the progress is.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Nandan.
Thank you, Gina. Take care.